Shalom Aleichem, and welcome back to Ḥokhmat ha-Ḥodesh, where we explore Jewish time, wisdom, and practice through the Hebrew calendar. I am your host, Yosef Lopez. The month we have already begun carries a name unlike any other in the Hebrew calendar. Not a number, not a description of nature, not a borrowed word from the language of seasons or harvests. The name Tammuz is the name of a god, specifically a Mesopotamian deity of fertility, embodying the powers of new life in spring. The name itself has a layered history. It derives from the Akkadian Tammuzi, which in turn goes back to the early Sumerian Damuzid, translated as the flawless young, which later became the standard Sumerian Dumuzi. His cult is attested in texts going back roughly 2600 to 2600 BC, which corresponds roughly to the Hebrew calendar of 1160 Anno Mundi, though it is almost certainly older than that. His most common title was Sipad, or shepherd. Tammuz was thought to be the child of the goddess Deuter, and she was the personification of a female sheep, the very embodiment of the field. His name and his other designations, mother milk, multiplier of pasture, suggests that he embodied everything a shepherd might wish for: grass in the desert, healthy lambs, abundant milk. He was, in his earliest form, the animating power of pastoral life. When his cult spread northward into Assyria in the 2nd and 1st millennia BC, that character shifted and adapted. He became associated less with the flock and more with agriculture, grain, the power in the vegetation of spring, and of course, thought to be dying or dead when the grain was cut and milled. In this Assyrian context, in the 7th century BC, the mourning rites are placed specifically. The mourning for Tammuz and his death in the summer comes around June and July, precisely the period in which our Hebrew month of Tammuz falls. The laments that are performed over him were dramatic, communal, and public. The cult centered on 2 yearly festivals, one celebrating his marriage to the goddess Inanna, and the other lamenting his death and descent into the netherworld. A Sumerian myth tells how Inanna herself eventually sends Tammuz as her own substitution to the underworld, and his sister, Geshtinanna, finds him there, and, unwilling to leave her brother in the underworld, makes a deal so the two of them can alternate their place in the underworld, each spending half the year among the living and the other half below. It's a myth of cyclical absence and return, of fertility withdrawn and restored once again. So this is the history that the name Tammuz carries with it. And each summer, in the cities of Mesopotamia, those who worshipped him mourned his absence, ritually, publicly, with weeping. The Israelites encountered this god in his calendar in Babylon. The Babylonian months names, as we have discussed before, including Tammuz, are where we get our Hebrew month names from. The month named for Tammuz becomes our month in which we have our own mourning rituals, our own fasting. But instead of mourning for some sort of cosmic, cyclical violence, our mourning is designed to make us focus on our responsibility and our accountability as a nation, of remembering where we as a people may have gone wrong, and why and what it demands of us now. Tammuz is very unique even within this pattern. Every other Babylonian name has been laundered, so to speak, by distance or forgotten practice. Nisan, Iyar, Siwan, these names have lost sort of their original pagan resonance through long usage. However, Tammuz is unique in that it is recorded in our own Mikra as a foreign cult penetrating the temple complex itself, which we'll examine now. The name Tammuz appears once in all of Scripture. That's one time in the entire Hebrew Bible, and it appears in the prophecies of Ezekiel, and it comes through a vision of Jerusalem where the prophet is transported to the temple itself. God is showing him what is taking place inside the holy city, inside the sacred precincts, a catalog of abominations, one leading to the next like rooms in a nightmare. And chapter 8 of his book records a vision in very careful detail, where it says, "Vayave oti el bet hashar bet Adonai asher el hasefona yedei sham anashim mishavot mebechot et Tammuz." He brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of Adonai, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Women sitting at the gate of the temple weeping for a Babylonian deity. So what exactly are these women doing? Well, Radak, the medieval biblical commentator, records multiple interpretations of this very verse. Some interpreters understand weeping for Tammuz not as lamentation per se, but actually as rejoicing. The women were celebrating Tammuz in the month of Tammuz, performing a very specific festival to an idol. Yehuda ibn Bilam records an interpretation in which a sort of trick was done to make the idol appear as though itself was weeping, in which they would heat up lead tears in the eyes that would then drip out. So it would appear that it was grieving for its own sorrow. And what are they mourning? Rabbi Saadia Gaon, one of the greatest authorities of the early medieval period, found references to Tammuz and ancient Greek poetry, where here he is really associated with the Greek character of Adonis, and the Greeks composed laments and dirges specifically for this figure, for Tammuz or Adonis, whom they called the son of the gods. And they were lamenting his fruit, mourning the ripeness of the harvest until it comes around again. So this is unmistakably some sort of fertility rite, a pagan ritual tied to agricultural cycles and cycles of nature. The scripture doesn't hide that this is what was happening in the temple, because it is important to understand that the penetration of Avodah Zarah into our own temple complex is very telling about our stage in history. The pagan mourning of Tammuz, the weeping we see at the temple gate, was mourning for a closed mythological event, a divine figure trapped in an internal cycle, whereas our Jewish fasts stand in direct opposition to that. Harambam, in his Guide for the Perplexed, explains the psychology and sort of anthropology behind the mythos or the mythology of Tammuz. explains for us what the women were actually mourning according to a false narrative about the cosmos itself. The myth that the images in the Temple of Babylon deceived to grieve for a murdered prophet, and that heaven itself participates in that sorrow. He tells us that there was once a prophet named Tammuz who went to the king of Babylon and urged him to worship the 7 planets in the 12 constellations. The king of Babylon refused and killed him in a most gruesome way. And that night, in the temple of Babylon, the great temple, images and idols from all over come and descend unto the altar there and grieve for Tammuz. Now, Rambam makes a crucial observation about this myth. Ordinary people are very much inclined to believe these types of fables. This is not a contempt for the masses, it's a recognition of how easily human beings are drawn to false cosmologies, to narratives that feel coherent and emotionally compelling. The women at the temple gate are not uniquely foolish. They are participating in a pattern of belief that is deeply natural to human inclination. Which is why Rambam argues the principal object of the entire law is not to blot out these opinions from the human heart and make the existence of idolatry impossible, not through suppression or silence, but through clarity and constant reorientation. The law, he argues, is constructed from its foundation to counter precisely this susceptibility, to teach a different account of how the world works, and to make that account so integral to Jewish practice that false narratives lose their hold. The anchor of the month of Tammuz in halakhic terms is the fast of the 17th, which we call Shiva Asar Tammuz. It's a minor fast. In Ladino, it used to be called Ta'anit Chico, because it's short, relatively speaking, to Tisha B'Av. It's observed from sunrise to dawn to sunset, and it's observed without the severity of the prohibitions of Tisha B'Av. But this smallness, this minorness in halakhic weight does not mean minor in what it encodes. The Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit, the 4th chapter, and the 6th halakha, records the events associated with this day. It says as follows: Hamisha debarim er'u et avothenu b'shiv'asar b'Tammuz, Hamisha b'tisha b'Av, b'shiv'asar b'Tammuz, nishbaru haluchot, b'telet amin, העיר, ושרף אפוטימוס את התורה והעמיד סלם בהיכל. 5 things befell our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz, and another 5 on the 9th of Ab. So on the 17th of Tammuz, what happens? The tablets, meaning the tablets of the luchot, what we call the Decalogue, or sometimes called the 10 Commandments, they were shattered. Moshe threw them down and broke them once he saw what was happening in the camp when he returned from the mountain. After that, many years after that, the daily offering, which is called the Tamid, and was discontinued. That the daily sacrifices of the temple stopped. On that day, the city was breached, meaning a long-held siege around Jerusalem. The enemy finally broke through the walls. A Roman officer named Apostamus burned the Torah, and also an idol was erected by him in the sanctuary. Now, these 5 events are interlinked. Let's examine what this list is actually cataloging, because it is more carefully constructed than one might think. The first item brings us all the way back to Sinai, when Moshe descended from the mountain carrying the tablets of the covenant and saw the people worshipping a golden calf. He shattered them at the foot of the mountain. The imagery here is very strong. The breach of the Berith through Avodah Zarah, the founding catastrophe of our desert period, opens this list. The second item, which is the cessation of the Tamid, the daily offering, belongs to the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem and during the destruction of the first temple. The continuous offering that had defined temple worship since the time of Moshe, more or less, came to an end. The word tamid itself means continuous or perpetual. Its cessation meant that the sanctuary had, in a functional sense, already ceased. The third is that the city was breached. It refers to the Roman penetration of Jerusalem's walls, which led to the second destruction of our holy temple. The fourth and fifth items belong to a character or a person named Apostamos. He burns our Torah scroll, and an idol is erected by him in the sanctuary. Now, look at this list as a whole. Why does the redactor assemble these 5, spanning well over 1,000 years, into a single date? More than just a chronicle of what happened, it explains a sort of typology, a portrait of how Israel fractures, moving from the inside outward. First, the people's own hand fracturing the covenant, which leads to, ultimately, the disruption of our worship. After that, military failure and political breach, which leads to the burning of our most sacred text and the desecration of our most sacred space by a foreign image. Self-inflicted wound to external catastrophe. The sequence is very important. It suggests that internal fracture makes the community vulnerable to external assault. Now we turn to the halakhic status of this fast. The question is more than just a reading or an academic understanding of the text. It's a halakhic history that's layered and more nuanced than popular practice might assume. So, Harambam, in his Perush HaMishnayot in Rosh Hashanah, in the first chapter, he says that during the Second Temple period, 3 of these 4 fasts, Tammuz, Tevet, and Gedaliah, were not obligatory. He writes there, if you want to fast, you may, and if you don't want to fast, you don't have to fast. These fasts are identified by the prophet Zechariah in chapter 8, verse 19. Ko amar Adonai Sevaot som ha'revi'i v'som ha'hamishi v'som ha'shvi'i v'som ha'esiri hiya lebet Yehuda l'saso v'simcha u'adim tovim v'emet v'shalom ahavo. So thus says the Lord of hosts, and he's speaking of a future time, the fast of the 4th month, which is 17th of Tammuz, the fast of the 5th month, which is Tisha B'Av, the fast of the 7th, which is Tzom Gedalia, and the fast of the 10th, which is the 10th of Tevet, shall become for the house of Judah joy and gladness and good appointed times. So therefore, love, truth, and peace. Our verse acknowledges that Israel does fast on these days. Zechariah is, of course, speaking to a nation of people who are fasting on these days and telling them that one day these commemorations of sorrow and of mourning will become days of joy. It names a practice already in place. It's not legislating these fasts as binding commands. No. But, so what does that mean for our own time? After a second destruction and a long exile. So Rav Papa's position in the Talmud is pretty direct. He gives us a sort of roadmap to figure out whether or not the fasts are of an obligatory nature or of a optional nature or of a forbidden nature, meaning that you rejoice on them instead. He says as follows. When there is neither temple nor active, the word here is shemad, we'll translate it as state-sponsored persecution, the fasts are optional. So if there's no temple, like today, and no state-sponsored persecution, you can fast if you want to, but you don't have to fast. Now, Rabbi Hananel, who was an 11th century North African authority, whose Talmud commentary is among the most important we possess, reads the Sugya in Tractate Rosh Hashanah with a precision that is not seen in other commentaries. Rav Papa distinguishes 3 separate conditions. He says, condition 1, when the temple stands. These days are occasions of rejoicing. Okay? That's one state. Second state, when there is active state-sponsored persecution, they are obligatory as fast days. Now, Rav Papa's distinction is clear, and this is what Harambam is quoting in his commentary. Ratzu mitanin, ratzu'en mitanin. The option to choose, it obtains only when both conditions are absent. If you have no temple and no persecution, now our situation does not fit neatly into this framework. The Rambam's position in the Mishneh Tora requires care in reading. There are other commentaries that try to have Rambam propose that he defines shalom to mean the Messianic era alone, and not a period of shamad, and thus it would never apply to our situation that a person would rejoice. But the precise reading, the one that Rabbeinu Hananel articulates, understands that Rav Papa's formulation is correct. In our current condition, the fasts remain a matter of communal practice and not a universal binding obligation. What both authorities understand and what is not in dispute is the underlying purpose. Remembrance in the service of repentance, not as an end or grief as an end in itself. Well, that's going to bring us to the purpose of a fast day itself. Here is the language of halakha in Hilchot Ta'aniyot, the 5th chapter, the 1st law. It's worth to examine precisely. It says, Yesham yamim shekol Yisrael מתענין בהן מפני השרות שאירעו בהן, כדי לעורר הלבבות ולפתוח דרכי תשובה. ויהיה זה זיכרון למעשינו הרעים ומעשי אבותינו שהיה כמעשינו עתה. אשר עליהם ולנו אותן הצורות שבזיכרון הדברים אל נשוב להיטיב. So, in English it is, there are fast days on which all Israel fasts. And the reason is because the account of the calamities that occurred on them. And we do this in order to awaken the hearts, our hearts, and to open the pathways of teshubhah. And this shall serve as a remembrance for our own evil deeds and the deeds of our ancestors, which are like our deeds now, to the point that it brought upon them and upon us those very calamities. For through the remembrance of these things, we shall return to doing good. Now note very precisely what Rambam is claiming. He is not asking us to grieve an ancient tragedy as a closed historical event. The pagan mourning of Tammuz was mourning for a closed mythological event, trapped in an eternal cycle. The Jewish fast stands in direct opposition. The Rambam insists that whatever pattern of failure produced the shattering of the tablets, the silencing of the Tamid, and the breach of the walls is not safely sealed in antiquity. It is a pattern available to us right now in the small and large choices of our own communal life. This is where the fast becomes not merely historical commemoration, but a real catalyst for national political action. The fast interrupts the ordinary rhythm of time and says, stop. Look at the pattern. Where are you in it? What choices is your generation making? The Jewish nation articulates through fasts like this one a unique understanding. The law is the source of sovereignty, not the other way around. Unlike the Western tradition, where authority creates law, Jewish sovereignty is grounded in the covenant at Sinai. It is the Berit that is the source of all authority, all power, all national legitimacy. The loss of territorial control, the exile, the destruction of institutions, none of these diminish Jewish national sovereignty, because that sovereignty rests on law, not on armies or empires. The fast, then, is not a backward glance at an irretrievable loss to remember what was. It is an insistence on the present moment and a claim on the future. The fast says we will stand. We will still have the capacity to examine ourselves, to turn, to change direction. We still embody the law, and so long as we do, the nation survives. The fast exists to interrupt the pattern before it can complete itself again. You have likely heard of the period between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, and that this period is often called the 3-week weeks. It's a phrase used so widely and repeated so automatically that most people assume it has always been there, a fixture of the Jewish calendar as ancient and authoritative as the fast days themselves. Now, this is not the case. What exists in halakha are two fast days in this time period, the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, 9th of Av. They are real, they have textual roots, there's rabbinic transmission, there's the weight of universal Jewish practice behind them, and of course, legal codification in the Mishneh Tora, Shulchan Aruch, all rooted in the Babylonian Talmud. What does not exist as a unified halakhic category? The 3 weeks. There is no Talmudic reference to anything resembling the 3 weeks. There is no chapter in the Mishneh Torah defining it as a single legal period with its own body of restrictions. Harambam does not treat these 21 days as a block, or 22 days. When he legislates mourning adjacent behaviors in Hilchot Aniyot, he does so around specific halakhic anchors, which are the fast days, the month of Ab, or the week of Tisha B'Av itself. It's not around a continuous arc stretching from the 17th of one month to the 9th of the next. The name, we call it Ben HaMetzarim, it comes from a verse in the Megillah, or the book of Echa, which is also called the Sefer Kinoth, or the Book of Lamentations. It comes from chapter 1, verse 3. Kareta Yehuda me'oni merov avoda hi yashiva bagoyim lo matzea manoah korodefeha hiskiyahu ben hamisarim. That is from Echa, chapter 1, verse 3. Judah has gone into exile due to affliction and hard servitude. She dwells among the nations and finds no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the straits. And that phrase, in the straits, ben hamisarim, in this very narrow space. The image is of a hunted figure, hemmed in with no room to maneuver. It is a verse about the fall of Jerusalem, about a people with no escape. It is a verse of sorrow and compression. It's a beautiful phrase, and it became in later usage, particularly in the Kabbalistic and Orthodox literature, the name of this entire 3-week period. But naming something is not legislating it. Giving a period an evocative title does not create a halakha category with legal force. So where does the halakha actually speak, and what does it say? If we examine in the Mishnah of Ta'anith, we have which is the very passage listed, the 5 calamities of the 17th of Tammuz. We also get continued immediately a halakhic statement about the month of Ab. And you might recognize it from our Adar episode, as it is the mirror image of Adar. Adar was Mishneh Adar marbim besimcha. When Adar enters, we increase our joy. Here's what it says here. Mishneh Av Let's try that again. Mishneh Av Mim'atin besimcha. When Av enters, we diminish in joy. Now, notice the Mishnah does not say when Tammuz enters its 17th day, we diminish in joy. The Mishnah's halakhic pivot is the first of Av, seemingly, right? Which is Mishneh Av. Now, I don't think it means really the first of Av here, because we'll see the Rambam explains what it means that when Ab enters, we diminish joy. Remember, all legal formula have to have legal action tied to them, not a action or not a law covering feelings. So what are the actions that are tied that we do demonstrate to show that we are minimizing our joy? So Harambam codifies it as follows. In Hilchot Ta'aniyot, after treating the 4 fasts and their purpose, he addresses the restrictions of Av specifically. The halakhic weight increases as Tisha B'Av approaches. And that happens in what we call Shabua Shel Halbo, the week in which Tisha B'Av itself falls. There is a graduated structure, but that graduated structure is not from the beginning of, not from the 17th of Tammuz on. It comes really with Av coming in as a month, but really with that week. This matters for a practical reason that touches people's lives. What exists in halakha and what does not exist is the practical difference between yes and no. When people ask questions, you want to figure out what they should do. May I attend a wedding on the 25th of Tammuz? Or really even, may I get married on the 25th of Tammuz? Can I schedule a wedding for that day? The halakhic answer is simply yes, even though, and there's a weight of like not doing weddings during this time, Jewish law does not prohibit it. So what happened historically is that later authorities, particularly in the Orthodox pietistic tradition and later through the enormous influence of Kabbalistic practice, extended the mourning complex backwards, filling the gap between the 2 fast days with a continuous restrictive atmosphere, almost like we did with Pesach and Shavuot, 2 holidays capstoning a period in between. And in this time period, in this 3-week time period, haircuts are forbidden, music is forbidden, weddings are forbidden, and the whole ark was given this name of Ben HaMesarim, between the straits. This extension is a case study in the displacement of halakha by pious customs, or more precisely, the elevation of custom to the status of law without the institutional authority that such elevation requires. Harambam is clear in the laws of courts and the laws of mamrim that customs have a defined role in Jewish legal life. They are local norms enacted by communal authorities within the framework of the law, but there is no autonomous force capable of overriding or expanding local customs onto all of Israel. When a custom presents itself as law, when it generates restrictions that the classical legal sources do not recognize, and then demands the same compliance as law, something has gone wrong with the chain of transmission. Now, I am not saying, I make it clear that the Orthodox Jews who observe, or any Jew who observes the restrictions of the 3 weeks, that there isn't some sort of sincerity there. What I am saying is that when we ask about what does Judaism teach, what does Jewish law prescribe, what does it prohibit, what does it permit, many of the things that we restrict are permitted. And to say something is prohibited when it is in fact permitted isn't just as bad as saying something is permitted when it is in fact prohibited. There is a difference between departing from customs, unauthoritative customs, and breaking the law. Those are different things, and conflating them does disservice to our tradition. So for any Jew who wishes to align their practice with the classical halakhic sources, precision is actually liberating. The fast days themselves remain genuine obligations, perhaps, rooted in the prophetic authority and universal Jewish acceptance. The 17th of Tammuz, of course, is a real fast day. Tisha B'Av is a real fast day. And there are ways that we demonstrate that we are lessening our joy. But these are very specific prohibitions during the week of Tisha B'Av until after the fast. What is not real, or rather what is real with custom but not as universal law, is a continuous mourning period that is intense or is presented as what Judaism requires during this time. So let us now do something that is important to undertake once we have deconstructed something. What is the law? What is the classical halakhic source? What are the classical halakhic sources? And what do they actually prescribe for this period? And we'll compare it with what many people have been told is required. So we have already established that the 3 weeks as a defined legal category does not exist in the Talmud or the Mishneh Tora.
It's 2 o'clock.
In the Talmud and Mishneh Torah, what we do know, what we want to do now is show what that means in practice, category by category, and I'll read the pertinent laws here. There are a few of them. And this, truthfully, we're only going to deal with the laws regarding, we won't deal with Tisha B'Av in full here. We're going to save that for the next episode. But we're going to deal mostly with what is conflated with the 3 weeks and what is practice. So, so we notice that there isn't even anything related to Tammuz as a mourning period. It just tells us when Av comes in, we lower our joy. בשבת שחל תשעה באב לראות בתוכה, אסור לספר ולכבס ולשבות כליהם מגוחץ. And that during the week in which Tisha B'Av falls, that's when we're forbidden to get a haircut and save it for after the fast is forbidden. And there is a custom amongst many in Israel not to eat meat that week, not to enter the bathhouse until the ta'anit passes. And there are many places that even become customary to nullify or to cancel all slaughtering from Rosh Chodesh until after the fast. That is the only law that we're going to be dealing with, and we'll kind of break it down here. So the first thing that most people notice about the 3 weeks is that they make a claim that there is no music allowed during the 3 weeks. Ask almost anyone observant, and they'll say that music is the number one thing. Now, that means no concerts, no live performances. It is treated as one of the signature practices of the season. Now, the Talmud and the Mishneh Torah contain no specific restriction on music during this period. There is something we will talk about, and I think we'll cover it more next time, and that there's an underlying prohibition that exists on music in general, which most people are surprised about. We'll take a look at those in their proper place, but just to reiterate, there is no prohibitions on music during this time specifically. Haircuts and shaving, we see that the Talmud in Ta'anith 29b and the Mishneh Torah, as we just read it here, prohibit haircuts during the week of Tisha B'Av, not from the 17th of Tammuz, not from Rosh Chodesh Av, just the week on which the 9th falls. So this means that if, for example, Tisha B'Av fell on a Thursday, that means the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week, you wouldn't be able to get a haircut until that Friday. If Tisha B'Av falls on a Sunday, there's no week of mourning whatsoever, and that is totally not, this doesn't apply. There are communities that are mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch to be stringent and to not get any haircuts from the 17th of Tammuz onwards. It's mentioned as a minority opinion. It's a stringency, It's a custom adopted by some communities, but it's not baseline law. It is not authoritative. Weddings. This is perhaps the greatest practical consequence because telling someone they cannot marry during a particular period is a significant legal claim. It requires serious grounding. The Talmud does not prohibit, well, requires a reason, because it's a positive, active commandment to get married, to have children, to start a family. Very big thing in Judaism. So to say that it's prohibited, that requires a very clear prohibition, I would say. Well, the Talmud does not prohibit weddings during the 3 weeks. It does not prohibit weddings during the 9 days even. What it addresses in the context of the week of teshubhah and the laws of the fast is a co-occurrence of extreme communal mourning with the private joy of a wedding, a tension that any sense of community would naturally feel. So latter Orthodox authorities extended a prohibition on weddings for the entire 3 weeks. This extension is, of course, a custom, a minhagh. It's not a Talmudic or a Maimonidean ruling. The Talmud and the Mishneh Tora are also clear on wearing new clothing and during laundry are permitted throughout the 3 weeks. Restriction on laundry appear in the week of Tisha B'Av, and specifically there, the Mishneh Torah prohibits washing clothing and wearing freshly pressed or laundered ironed garments during that week. Freshly pressed, freshly laundered, but it doesn't have to be dirty. The Shulchan Aruch adds restrictions from ha-Ḥodesh Av onwards. Again, same pattern. Talmud and Mishneh Torah established one threshold, and a latter custom starts to extend it backwards to make it more intense, to make it more difficult. Now, the meat and wine, the Talmud and Ta'anith 26, it codifies in Hilchot Ta'aniyot, halakha 7 of chapter 5 and halakha 8 of chapter 5. It addresses meat and wine specifically in the context of the final meal before Tisha B'Av. Not as a specific 9 days restriction, definitely not as a 3 weeks restriction. The Rambam notes the local practice, which is a minhagh. It's not an actual din. That means Jews do not slaughter from ha-Ḥodesh Av onwards, but it's not a universal legislation. So what this survey, I guess you could call it, reveals is a consistent pattern. The classical sources established a graduated structure of restriction that intensifies during the week of Tisha B'Av and peaks with the fast itself. But the latter custom extended many of these restrictions backwards, all the way from the week of Tisha B'Av for the 9 days to the full 3 weeks, and each extension may have had its own communal rationale once upon a time, but none of them are from the Talmud, and none of them are in the Mishneh Torah, therefore none of them are obligatory. Knowing the difference is not a license to do as you please. It's a condition for doing as the law actually directs. So we have covered a great deal, and much ground in what we've covered in our episode so far. We discussed the name of Tammuz. We discovered what that it belongs originally to this cult. We understood how Yehezkel saw this cult being practiced within the confines and the precinct of our own temple. We looked at the 5 calamities of the 17th of Tammuz, and how and why the Mishnah assembles them together. We sat with the teaching of our sages that what produced these catastrophes is not safely in the past, that we are right now capable of the same patterns that brought them on. And we looked carefully at the halakhic record and found that the period between the two fast days is not in classical law the unbroken mourning season that popular presentation makes it out to be. So what do we do with all this? The sages of blessed memory, Hamim Zichrono Libraha, tell us that these fasts exist for a very particular reason. Le'orer halevavot u'lefetowah darchei teshubhah. They are to awaken our hearts and to open up the pathways of teshubhah. The fast interrupts the ordinary rhythm of the year. It asks us to examine ourselves, to examine our history, to examine our present. We see that all of our calamities begin with internal rupture. Israel breaks the covenant from within with its own hand. We act with some sort of violence to our own tradition. It is an act of impatience, of anxiety, of the community deciding that we cannot wait for genuine relationship with the divine, as seen in the building of the ha-Ḥodesh, the building of the golden calf. We therefore manufacture a substitute that is immediate, visible, manageable, something that we can control. And then the damage radiates outward. Worship becomes disrupted. The city becomes vulnerable. The sacred text is burned and our sanctuary desecrated. Internal fracture makes the community vulnerable to external assault. This is the pattern the sages say is available to us to examine now. We might ask, in what ways today do we replicate the structure of the golden calf? In what ways do we reach for an immediate and visible and manageable substitute that feels like certainty, rather than doing the slower, more tedious, more challenging work that a genuine life of berith, of covenant, of responsibility demands? In what ways do we dress up our made-up customs as Jewish legal norms? Or let the accumulated weight of some sort of communal habits displace the actual content of what was transmitted to us? These are not questions that are always easy to answer, but they are questions that a fast is designed to make us ask. And when we ask these questions, when we do our examinations, there is a particular kind of resistance that always meets these critical questions and this self-examination. This resistance is often couched in the language of love and unity. The objection goes something like this. Maybe you've heard it. Oh, but no, we can't say anything now. During the 3 weeks, this is precisely when we need unity. The temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, which is baseless hatred. What we need now is habat chinam, this unconditional, baseless love. It's a beautiful sentiment, don't get me wrong. And it comes from a genuine place of care for communal cohesion. But it operates ultimately, in my opinion, as a thought stopper. Any scrutiny of Jewish conduct, any honest self-appraisal of communal failure, all of it gets swatted away in the name of unity. And the result is a kind of toxic solidarity, a closing of ranks that presents itself as love, but functions as immunity from accountability. We should examine what this does to the concepts it invokes, because sinah and haba in classical Hebrew are not what this usage assumes them to be, that is hate and love. Ahava, we could translate as love. And the framework of the covenant is not a feeling of warm solidarity. It's a relational orientation grounded in commitment and truth. It's the kind of love that is spoken of in the book of Mishlei. Open rebuke is better than hidden love. A love that cannot bear honest critique is not ahava in the classical sense. It is something closer to its opposite. A relationship that prioritizes the comfort of the beloved or one's own comfort in the relationship over the genuine well-being. And sinat hinam, the phrase from the Talmud that tradition codifies, identifies as the cause of the Second Temple's destruction, it does not mean, in its rabbinic context, disagreement or criticism or failure to maintain warm feelings towards every Jew at all times. Hinam means without cause or gratuitously. The hatred, the sinah, the Talmud indicts, is hatred that has severed itself from any legitimate basis, hatred that has become an end in itself, feeding on resentment and faction for their own sake. It's not a description of honest reckoning with communal failure at all. When the call for ahabah tinam is used to silence the very self-examination that the fast days are designed to provoke, it has inverted the meaning of both terms simultaneously. It has turned a call for love rooted in truth into a condition. You may not ask hard questions here. And has turned the indictment of gratuitous hatred into a club with which to strike anyone who attempts honest critique. We cannot fully untangle this here. The Av episode will take it up directly because what we will explore there is what genuine political teshubhah looks like. The willingness to take responsibility for our collective choices and their consequences, which is impossible so long as every attempt at self-evaluation is met with a demand for premature reconciliation. You cannot turn if you are not permitted to see where you are standing. For now, it is enough to name the pattern, to notice that it rhymes structurally with the golden calf. The community, unable to tolerate the discomfort of genuine reckoning, reaches instead for something warm and immediately manageable, a slogan that feels like love, and calls it ahava. The fast asks more of us than that, and here is where the month of Tammuz offers something that the language of mourning alone cannot. It offers the possibility of teshubhah. The sages of blessed memory devoted great attention to teshubhah, and their account is striking in its optimism. Teshubhah is not self-punishment. It is not the performance of contrition. It is a change of direction, a genuine reorientation of conduct and intention available to any person without any intermediary, without a predetermined season. The fast days help give us a structure for it. They interrupt our ordinary rhythm of the year and give us the ability to examine. We see that from the words of our prophet Zechariah, when he tells us that the fast of the 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th month shall become days of joy and gladness, that we see that our fasts are not permanent. They are conditional, and not on external political circumstances alone, but on the return, on the teshubhah that our sages teach us is always possible. It couches it in that language. The fast days And the understanding of the sages are not ends in themselves. They are instruments pointed toward a moment when they will no longer be necessary, when the pattern of rupture has been genuinely interrupted, and what was broken has been restored. This is what the month of Tammuz holds, if we let it do its job, or if we let it work. It's not a season of gloom bracketed by 2 fast days. It's an invitation, one that might be sharp, honest, historically grounded, to look at the pattern we are in and ask if we are willing to turn from it. This is our episode on the month of Tammuz. We thank you for listening and being a part of this. Next month, in the episode of Ab, we'll turn to the month of our destruction of our temples, and we'll examine Tisha B'Av directly, its halakhic structure, its unique weight in the calendar, and what grief looks like on that day, and why we have this national day of grief. We'll also try to explore what political teshubhah looks like, and why it's important for us to have the willingness to take responsibility for our collective choices and their consequences. Until then, thank you so much for listening to Ḥokhmat ha-Ḥodesh. Thank you for learning with us. If you found meaning in this episode, please share it with your friends. And you can always support our work on Patreon. And until then, be well.